Mozambique moto, kulima na kulima, ukalogi kagimbi, kagimbi kakulimi, ladaloza, 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 tuagua, ladaloza, yoi kololo, kulonto kwelingoma.
Colonial wars are not just a memory. Today in Mozambique, 10,000 guerrillas are fighting a European power, Portugal. But wars have a way of growing, and this one is now in the front line of a wider battle affecting the whole of Africa. In the last 20 years, the continent has been through dramatic political changes. Almost everywhere, Africans have won full political rights and independence. But in South Africa, events took a different course. There, as the campaign for racial equality grew in the 50s, the measures taken against it became more ruthless. Dissenters who escaped death or imprisonment have either fled abroad or gone underground. South Africa has drawn Southwest Africa and now Rhodesia into her orbit. Together they form a compact stronghold of white minority rule, sustained by South Africa's enormous wealth and well-equipped army. But the Republic's strategy for preserving its white citadel is complicated by the continued presence of Portugal, the last colonial power. Of her three territories, Guinea, Angola and Mozambique, the two largest and richest lie between the South African bloc and the rest of Africa. They have modified the growing conflict between North and South. The Portuguese government, conservative, authoritarian and Catholic, was moulded during the long rule of Dr. Salazar. Just as he rejected democratic methods at home, Salazar refused self-determination to the empire. He has stated clearly, "We will not sell, we will not cede, we will not surrender. We will not quit one fragment of our sovereignty." Portugal is among the poorest countries in Europe, known mainly for wine and cheap holidays. Ironically, this is partly why she still clings to her empire. The present Premier, Dr. Marcelo Caetano, admits this. Without Africa, he says, we will be a small nation. With Africa, we're a big power. Pride in an imperial past is mingled with more practical considerations. For the wealth of Angola and Mozambique are attracting massive foreign investment to help Portugal balance her own budget. But for a foreign audience, Portugal has other arguments. The United Nations has condemned her African policy, and in defense, she stresses her particular colonial concept, apparently the reverse of apartheid. She insists that Portuguese society is naturally multiracial, and the Portuguese rule benefits all races without distinction. Many Africans remain unconvinced. They point out that before the wars of liberation, Portugal did nothing for their welfare. Guinea held the world record for illiteracy at 99%. In Angola, 1 in every 2 babies died at birth. They argue that Portuguese law discriminates against Africans, and worst of all, allows forced labor to live on in new forms. No criticism is allowed. The press is heavily censored. Portugal has always suppressed opposition and even denied its existence. In Guinea, 50 dock workers were shot for striking in 1959. In 1960, 30 Angolans were killed on a protest march, and 500 Mozambicans were killed on a peaceful demonstration at Mueda. While Sharpeville became headline news, incidents like these in the Portuguese territories went unreported. Against this background, fighting broke out in Angola in 1961. Armed struggle began in Guinea in 1963 and in Mozambique in 1964. By using guerrilla tactics, the three nationalist armies have been able to force a much larger army onto the defensive. Mozambique was the last colony to get a national liberation party. In 1962, political exiles and underground resistance groups joined to form the Mozambique Liberation Front, FRELIMO for short. The Mueda massacre had convinced most members that only war could bring them independence. They began to fight in 1964, and within months drove the Portuguese troops out of most of the two northern provinces. Now, the guerrilla army and a civilian population of over 1 million control an area about the size of England, ranging from the well-populated forests of Cabo Delgado to the scattered bush of this section of Niassa. It takes 3 weeks hard marching to cross Niassa province from north to south. While fighting to extend their territory, the guerrillas have to work hard to maintain their lines of supply and communication. Many small units divide the work between them, and the local people do what they can to help. The army is a wing of the political party, and soldiers regard themselves as armed civilians. The leaders are constantly on the move, visiting all the military bases and the scattered civilian settlements. They must listen to problems, discuss new policies, and coordinate the whole campaign. Pedro Juma is Assistant Secretary of Defense, Niassa Province. Juma is in his mid-20s and comes from Niassa. He joined the underground before the war, went abroad to train, and returned to fight. Alberto Joaquim is Deputy Commander of the FRELIMO Army. He is 30, comes from Cabo Delgado, and was a school teacher before the war. Cadawele is 56 and from Niassa. He is the Provincial Secretary with mainly civilian responsibilities. Juma and Joachim were lucky to have been to school at all, but afterwards they found that as Africans, their opportunities were still very limited. They were recruited by underground workers, and like most FRELIMO leaders, their present ideas have been formed almost entirely by their experience in the struggle. Cadawele belongs to an older generation, and at his age, joining a revolution was a big jump. But he has served in the colonial administration, and more than most of his colleagues, he knows just how the Portuguese work. He has also seen generations of his countrymen flee as refugees from Portuguese rule.
The first refugees to happen in to happen in Tanzania, it was in 1905. Actually, they did not wish to leave Mozambique or Niassa to come to Tanzania, but it was because of the stupidity of the Portuguese treatment given to our people. So our people disliked. They were beating them and putting them on farms, no pay, or at least we call it a contract. They could be put on the farm or sometimes on the tea farms, cotton farms, for at least for 6 or 9 months or 12 months. But the pay, it was only 6 spoons salt, not money. So they worked hard, they received nothing. Instead of that, they were getting their own food from their own villages. And the Portuguese farmers were not supplying them with food. When they started to ask for food, they were called in and beaten. So in 1922, people also decided to leave Niassa, especially Niassa and Yaoland. They left in March 1922. That time I was young. I was in the line.
The war changed this, and young men today can stay and fight. But in 1964, this course must have seemed almost suicidal.
Eu fui dos camaradas que o nosso partido incumbiu para ir desencadear a luta em Moçambique.
I was one of the people chosen by our party to go and start the war in Mozambique.
No dia 15 de agosto de 1964,
we went in on August the 15th, 1964, with all our equipment.
Vindo do exterior, com nosso material e tudo. Tivemos dificuldades quando entramos, porque estivemos muito sobrecarregados de material.
Entering the country was difficult because we were heavily loaded, and there were very few of us, only 22 in all. We were carrying everything we needed to start the war, and we had additional equipment to give to other comrades inside who would volunteer to join us. As well as this, we had supplies to support us after the fighting had begun.
Aqueles que iam voluntariar-se para vir juntar conosco, e material ainda, abastecermos depois de começar a guerra.
Since then, the army has increased to 10,000. Supporting them is a trained reserve of 10,000 waiting for arms. But at the beginning of the war, lack of military strength was not the only problem.
Primeiro, íamos numa zona onde as populações não sabiam nada. Primeiro, devíamos marchar sem contato com ninguém para permitirmos fazer uma ação.
We were going into a region where the people knew nothing about us. First of all, we had to avoid meeting anyone. It was a 3-day march to the place chosen for our attack, and we didn't have enough food for the journey.
Não tínhamos cantis
There
para
was no
furar.
water in the area, and none of us had water bottles.
E não tínhamos pessoa que conhecesse aquele sítio.
Then there was no one with us who knew the area and could give us information about the enemy, how their forces were deployed.
A luta armada em Moçambique! Viva o povo moçambicano! Viva!
Despite the odds, on the 25th of September 1964, Joachim led FRELIMO into its very first battle.
Quando eu dei fogo,
When I opened fire, all my comrades followed suit. At that moment, the Portuguese administrator came out of another door round the side. My comrades fired on him and he fell in the doorway.
abriram fogo contra ele e caiu logo na porta.
The early battles stunned the Portuguese, who withdrew from the countryside into a few fortified towns and bases. FRELIMO could work openly over wide areas. Flight was no longer the only alternative to crippling taxes and forced labor. The Portuguese now began to reap the harvest of those years of bitterness.
Baixe os colonialistas! Baixe os cracaios! A luta continua! A luta continua! Mata Moçambique! Mata Moçambique! Mata Moçambique! Mata!
A revolution involves much more than fighting, and men like Pedro Juma are not just military commanders.
Eu superviso, junto dos camaradas, todos os trabalhos da província.
Together with other comrades, I help with every kind of work in the province. The most important fields are the political and the military. The political field includes organizing the people, clarifying our national policy, and relating it to this province,
O enquadramento de mais indivíduos.
recruiting new members for FRELIMO.
FRELIMO has grown with the struggle. Its strength is the enthusiasm of the whole nation. Public meetings are the mainspring of political life. Speeches have always been a part of Mozambique's tradition, and audiences are used to listening and judging them. Pictures, on the other hand, are new, and many people are only now learning to understand photographs. But they can help to make news from other regions more vivid, and theoretically, they bypass language barriers. More than 16 languages are spoken in Mozambique, and although FRELIMO teaches Portuguese as a common tongue, interpreters are an essential part of every meeting.
Hoje estamos entrando no 7º ano da luta armada.
Today we are entering the 7th year of armed struggle.
E é nesse momento em que nós devemos refletir, saber por que nós conquistamos sucesso durante os últimos anos passados da nossa luta.
This is a day when we should ask why we have been able to gain victories during these years of struggle.
Nós devemos compreender de que a primeira arma que nos levou a nós conquistar esse sucesso que nós tivemos é a unidade através da FRELIMO, união de todos os povos de Moçambique, de todo o povo moçambicano, que estava dividido em tribos, que tribo não conhecia outra tribo, os costumes, mas nós difundimos num só povo, dirigida pela FRELIMO.
We must understand that the first weapon we armed ourselves with to win these victories was unity. Unity in FRELIMO. Unity between all the people of Mozambique. People who before were divided into tribes. One tribe did not know the next, did not understand their customs. But now we have united to form a single nation, guided by FRELIMO. This was the first and most important weapon that brought us victories. Isn't this true?
In Niassa alone, there are 4 ethnic groups, 4 languages, and 3 major religions. FRELIMO concentrates on creating a national identity. The army itself is a powerful unifying force. More informal activities also help a common culture to take shape. Soldiers teach each other their traditional songs and dances, which are becoming part of a national rather than purely regional heritage. When they are not on the move, the soldiers live in small, well-camouflaged bases. They supply most of their own needs and grow food in plots sited a few miles from the base to prevent drawing attention to it. A base is just a collection of light wood or grass houses which can be built in an afternoon out of local materials and abandoned at a moment's notice. Each unit contains recruits from different regions. Northerners now join openly in large numbers, but some Southerners also come in through the underground. Before the war, they trained in Algeria or Tanzania, but now most training takes place in Mozambique itself. Volunteers learn to read and speak Portuguese, as well as having political instruction. Radios bring news and entertainment from outside, as well as the regular FRELIMO broadcast. Ideas from other countries are a constant stimulus, but have not directly influenced FRELIMO's political thought. Their revolution arose out of the particular conditions in Mozambique and remains essentially Mozambican. The Army is initiating another important social change. It offers women opportunities unthinkable in either traditional or colonial society. In the bases, they still do their normal domestic tasks, but they share them with men. They do the same training as men, they live, work, and a few even fight with them under the same conditions. The women in the Army come from many different regions and backgrounds. Although most are single, some combine marriage and even children with full-time political work. The provincial head of the women's detachment is Monica Stepila. She comes from a Niassa village and has married a FRELIMO fighter. Before the war, she had only a few weeks' schooling and has learned all her Portuguese with FRELIMO. Mary, her assistant, is also from a local village and has never been to school. Maria from Cabo Delgado has a very different past. Her father was a farmer who was rich by African standards and could pay to educate his children. But her school would not allow Maria to go beyond the 3rd class. When the war started, she left home, aged only 13, to go to the FRELIMO secondary school in Tanzania. She now speaks English and Portuguese fluently and has 2 English O-levels. While Maria was studying, Monica and Mary were working, but they have all been able to gain from the new approach to education.
Because in Mozambique, if a girl reaches a certain class, or even most men can go up to standard 6 or more, but especially girls, if they are in standard 3 or 4, they stopped. They said that is enough for us, Africans.
When I started working, I heard there was a school. I went and studied till I knew some Portuguese.
After I knew a little bit of English, I started taking science, mathematics, geography, and a little of genders. Science.
Military training is compulsory for everyone in FRELIMO. Maria may later join the medical service or use her English in the information department, but on leaving school, she first had to join the army.
That was wonderful because most Mozambican people are trained, are being trained. So if you're not trained, you'll feel, you feel as if you are out of the situation happening inside Mozambique.
Some women take part in fighting, but their main contribution has been in political work.
My work is to talk to the people, to find out what kind of work they can do for the war. This work is now mainly cultivating the land to produce food, looking after orphan children, finding a home for them, helping these children. Mary works with me. She goes out among the people and works with them, encourages them, tilling the land with them. She works together with the women's group, transporting supplies.
For Mary, the hardest job of all is looking after orphans. Previously, the extended family provided the only form of social security. But now orphans, together with the disabled and the aged, are the party's responsibility. The women's detachment does much of the work. The war has inspired a sense of solidarity, but it has also increased the need for it, creating its own casualties and disrupting family ties. Many of the militants have personal experience of this. Maria's own family is divided, and some of her brothers work for the Portuguese. Monica's family solidly supports FRELIMO, but her work physically separates her from them and from her husband as well.
My husband is fighting with FRELIMO. I live in the provincial base. He's stationed at another base out there at the front. We have a month sometimes when we can live together, talk with each other. Then he goes back to where he's stationed.
My other brothers are on the other side of the enemy. That is dreadful, because we don't see one another. We don't write letters to one another. There seem to be a barrier between us. They are on the other side and we are on the other side. Maybe one day we shall meet.
A voz da FRELIMO. Esta noite vamos apresentar o comentário dos planos criminosos de Portugal contra os povos das colônias em línguas portuguesas de Maconde.
The provincial secretary is responsible for the whole province. First, we have soldiers, and again we have the people as well. And my duty is to look after these two groups together and see that they are working together and they do everything for the struggle together.
The army has a strong influence on the whole population. Soldiers based in a district work closely with civilians, and new attitudes spread through personal contact. Even guerrillas on the march stop to rest and exchange news in villages on the way. Most civilians live in communities based on family and clan, but they are now also part of FRELIMO's national political structure. The party is rapidly replacing the authority of village headmen or councils of lineage elders, but a great deal of work goes into gaining their support. Consultation and discussion are part of running this kind of revolution. Even paperwork is important, but central control must be combined with local initiative.
We have district, and in the district we have to establish a local section, and in the local we have to get another one, second one.
Once or twice a month I go round to every cell, locality and district to hear about the people's problems. And to discuss with them how we can resolve these problems and how we can develop new methods of work within that cell, locality or district.
If we may need to get a branch, we have to come to that place and organize them. And after organizing, then we have to call the people. And now the people, we have to say to them to get their own branch and to prepare their own branch. And how they can prepare their own branch is one is they have also a special meeting now for election themselves over that side. Now they put names themselves. They have to elect the people themselves.
This organization is under constant attack. Civilians are battered with bombs and napalm. Blackened earth and sometimes freshly dug graves are the visible scars. FRELIMO's strong and popular political structure is as much a threat to the Portuguese as their army. While trying to bomb it out of existence, the Portuguese are also making efforts to undermine it. They drop propaganda leaflets, or when they can, place them in conspicuous places. The message is usually aimed at a particular group. They offer trips to Mecca and special schools to Muslims, whereas previously they persecuted them. They offer special privileges to each group and tell them that FRELIMO is pursuing the tribal ambitions of their traditional rivals. The aim is to fragment the population in order to impose as the one unifying factor the Portuguese state. Posters usually promise money, food or clothes to those who leave FRELIMO for a protected village. But promises are not as easy to implement as threats, and the campaign of persuasion has its other side. Helicopter raids are increasing, and a recent United Nations report describes what may follow. It said, men, women and children are herded into concentration camps to suffer beatings and humiliations. Indiscriminate killings are a normal feature of the war. No village is completely secure, but in the old liberated areas, the chances of a successful Portuguese attack are fairly remote. The regular army watches all enemy bases, as well as keeping up a vigorous offensive which prevents the Portuguese diverting troops to the attack. And every village has its own militia and its own defense strategy. The people have left their traditional villages to live in more scattered houses hidden under trees. Some even camp in temporary bivouacs during the dry season. If necessary, they can evacuate their homes swiftly, leaving little for the enemy to capture. The liberated areas are like a cloth with holes in it. FRELIMO is the cloth, the remaining Portuguese bases are the holes. FRELIMO has been gradually consolidating what it has won.
When we speak of the struggle, we mean the political, economic and struggle. The purpose of the struggle and the part that they could play in it. Then at that time it was essential to undertake the work of national reconstruction in the liberated areas. The people needed social amenities.
Levar uma vida organizada.
Sikuti nkhondo yokhana Portuguese, mkati mwa nkhondo ya Portuguese iliponja nkhondo nchenja kenche imene tili kumenyana nayo. Nkhondo ya matenda ni nkhondo ya ujinga, ndi chifukwa chake iwoneka kuti uku tili kumenya nkhondo, uku tili kuyika xikola, uku tili kuyika vipatala.
Nós lutamos com o inimigo nosso direto, que é o português.
We're fighting our enemy, the Portuguese, in many different ways. We're fighting them with guns. But very important, we fight them by growing food. We also fight them by building schools and hospitals.
The moment FRELIMO had some measure of control, it had to start trying to improve the desperately low standard of living. The most urgent need was to grow more food. Some relief was felt at once from the ending of forced labour, but better techniques were also called for. The local committees began to plan agricultural work, and despite air raids, they managed to increase the areas cultivated and often improve the yield. In Niassa, people used to grow maize only during the rains. Now they plant in the dry season as well, producing 3 harvests in place of 1. New crops are being tried, and a cooperative system is taking shape. The army cooperative set an example, and Pedro Juma has helped many villages start their own.
As cooperativas são organizadas em cada...
The cooperatives are organized in all the local divisions, the localities and districts. They have a committee to run them, composed of all sorts of people. There are some women, some captains of the militia, and some direct representatives of the people. This committee meets to discuss how the work should be organized.
Como é que pode ser organizado o trabalho?
The man in charge is the secretary of that district or locality.
Do distrito ou da localidade.
He makes up a list of all the people who take part in the work.
Pessoal que participa no trabalho, e depois da colheita eles registram todos os produtos.
Then, after the harvest, he makes a list of the produce, and they hold a meeting where it is distributed.
Dos produtos, em que 3/4
3/4 or 4/5 go to the people in the district, and 1/4 or 1/5 go to the militants based in that district.
Encontram naquele distrito. Em especial, em 1968, tiveram bons produtos.
In 1968, we had especially good crops, and that encouraged the formation of cooperatives.
Food is not the only material need. Old crafts are encouraged and new ones introduced, for the emphasis is on self-sufficiency. Niassa lags behind Cabo Delgado, where sewing and wood carving are well established, but here too new skills are being taught, new materials exploited. Even the palm cases have their uses. Like every aspect of life, the social services are adapted to war conditions. Medical care is provided by a network of small bush clinics built and located on the same principles as military bases. In western Niassa, there are 5 of these, each with facilities for inpatients and staffed by 2 nurses. The whole social program is short of funds. The United Nations has called on its members to aid FRELIMO, and a few governments, including the Scandinavian and the Dutch, have given grants. Small donations come from independent bodies like the World Council of Churches, but the backlog of neglect is enormous. When the war started, there was no African doctor in the whole of Mozambique. FRELIMO has sent students abroad to study, but none are yet qualified. It runs its own nurses' course but the shortage of staff is still acute. There is little equipment, and there are never enough drugs.
The
strength of the service is its flexibility. In Niassa, where the population is too scattered to serve efficiently from fixed centres, the medical staff travel round setting up temporary treatment posts in the small hamlets. Not only health, but every kind of work is held back by the low level of basic education. Before the war, none of these children would have gone to school. Now they, and about 20,000 others in the liberated areas, are receiving free primary education. The educational system is designed not to separate children from their parents, as the Portuguese schools did. Apart from reading and writing, they learn mainly about the history, geography and culture of Mozambique. These children are all from peasant families, and most will grow up to work the land. Each school has a plot where the pupils grow their own food, learning at the same time about improved agricultural methods. The schoolmaster's job is never finished, for he is also a leader and a fighter. Many of the teachers first came to FRELIMO as soldiers. Their work in the schools is just another aspect of the struggle. The new schools are also having an important influence on the adult generation. At this school, 11 of the children are boarders, but the other 16 live in the nearby village. Some of their parents are members of the local militia. For them, the success of the revolution is not just a hope for the future, it is a positive achievement from which their children can already benefit.
Yeah, escreve A. Mete o traço assim, curvado, depois volta a fazer. Vamos, escreve A. Aqui. yokunoni yokusukulu ala salama kuso oponde jomene na mwalimu basi alimtendele bale bene moyo
Yende mohori hapa yende mohori.
Bala mangu ndipo Yena bolimboli. Ya. Moi mwawe usanga kumanya. Ya
Dr. Marcelo Caetano has said, self-determination cannot be expressed by bits of paper put into the hands of savannah savages. This is true. In Mozambique, it is being expressed by their ability to fight. The front is gradually creeping southwards. Since 1964, FRELIMO has consolidated its position in Cabo Delgado and Niassa, and in 1968, it opened its third front in Tete, where it has gained control over half the province. Fighting there has been tough, because Tete is the key to a development plan for the Zambezi Valley, which is an essential part of Portuguese military strategy. The Portuguese hope that by introducing industry, intensive agriculture and new white settlers, they can make the valley a natural barrier to FRELIMO advance. All this centers around the building of a giant dam at Cabora Bassa, which will provide power and irrigation, while mineral reserves in Tete will be raw material for heavy industry. But most important of all are the international implications of the scheme. Money and expertise is coming from South Africa, France, West Germany, and to a lesser extent Britain. This assistance inevitably has political overtones, and firms from Sweden and Italy have already withdrawn. South Africa is providing 2/3 of the money and will also buy most of the power. To FRELIMO, her motives are clear.
The importance of this province, Tete, is its position, for it lies between South Africa and Rhodesia. Once the struggle in Tete becomes more advanced, our comrades, the South African and Rhodesian fighters, will have an opening so that they too can start their own military campaigns.
The South African Army has recently been receiving special training in anti-guerrilla warfare, and since 1968 there have been reports of South African units actually stationed in Tete near the dam site. Portugal receives valuable assistance from another source. Most of her military hardware comes from NATO countries, some of it supplied under NATO agreements. To justify this aid, Portugal tries to link FRELIMO with communist aggression. She argues that she is in Africa because, as one Foreign Minister Nogueira put it, that is also in the general interest of the free world. FRELIMO seeks help where it can. Weapons come mostly from Eastern Europe and China. Other aid also comes from the West. But FRELIMO is cautious of all outside pressures, and the fighters, teachers and nurses in Mozambique are all Mozambican. The liberation movements in the Portuguese colonies are convinced that Portugal alone could not have held out against them. As it is, Portugal commits to the African wars half her annual budget and an ever-increasing army. In Mozambique, 60,000 Portuguese troops have been unable to contain the 10,000 FRELIMO guerrillas. Their 1970 dry season offensive resulted in heavy casualties. The Portuguese army itself admitted to more than 300 deaths in 4 months. Some of the dead were members of the crack commando units, a military elite who may be convinced of the Portuguese cause. But the bulk of the army is formed of unwilling conscripts, some illiterate, and many with little idea of whom they are fighting or why. FRELIMO guerrillas, on the other hand, are clear about their objectives. At the beginning of the war, the target was independence from Portugal. Today it is the same, but in the liberated areas they have already experienced independence. They are defending and building on what they have already achieved. In the front line, They're fighting for a way of life they now know.
Hasta kuve sopala, kwa heri